The cafe was almost full, yet it felt quiet in a way only rainy afternoons could make it. Outside, the streets of Seattle were wet and shining, cars moving slowly, people rushing with heads down. Inside, soft music played, cups clinked, and the smell of coffee wrapped around everyone like a blanket. It was the kind of place where time slowed. Whether you wanted it to or not, Clara Evans stood near the counter, holding her cup with both hands. She was 26, dressed simply in a light sweater and jeans. Her hair tied back in a loose way that showed she hadn't tried too hard. She wasn't in a hurry. In fact, she didn't really know why she was there. She had walked in to escape. The noise of her thoughts, nothing more. She looked around without meaning to, her eyes passing faces she would never remember. Then they stopped by the window. At a small round table sat two men who didn't fit the rest of the room. They weren't young professionals tapping on laptops or couples whispering over dessert. They were older, calm, and strangely present. One of them laughed softly, not loud enough to draw attention, but real enough to feel honest. The other listened closely, nodding as if every word mattered. Clara didn't know their names yet, but she felt drawn to them in a way she couldn't explain. Daniel Brooks sat with his coat folded neatly on the chair beside him. His hair was starting to gray at the sides, and his face carried the lines of someone who had smiled a lot and worried even more. Across from him was Michael Reed, slightly younger, with kind eyes and a thoughtful way of holding himself, as if he had learned patience the hard way. They talked slowly, not rushing, not checking their phones. It felt rare, Clara told herself, to look away. It wasn't polite to stare, but something about them made her feel less alone. She had ended a long relationship only months ago, one she thought would lead to marriage. Instead, it ended quietly, leaving questions she didn't know how to answer. Since then, places like this cafe felt heavy with memories and silence. She took a small sip of coffee and finally looked down. Ready to move on? That's when Daniel looked up. Their eyes met. For just a second. There was no surprise in his face, only a calm awareness, followed by a polite nod. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't an invitation. It was simply human. But it changed everything. Clara felt her heart beat faster. A voice in her head told her to stay where she was, to finish her drink, to leave like everyone else. Another voice, quieter but stronger, pushed her forward. She took a breath and walked toward their table. The sound of her steps made Michael glance up. Both men looked at her now, curious but not uncomfortable. Clara stopped beside the empty chair, suddenly aware of how unusual this must seem. "Hi," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves in her chest. "I know this is random, but you both look like you're having a real conversation. I don't see that much anymore. Would it be strange if I sat with you for a bit?" For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel smiled. It wasn't playful or surprised. It was warm, like he understood the courage it took to ask. "I think strange is overrated," he said. "Go ahead." Clara sat down, her hands resting in her lap. Michael introduced himself first, then Daniel. They didn't ask many questions. At once, they let the moments settle. They talked about the rain, about how Seattle weather always felt heavier in the afternoon. Clara shared that she worked in digital marketing and spent too much time on screens. Daniel said he used to work in finance but had recently taken early retirement. Michael mentioned he taught history at a community college and still loved it. The conversation moved quickly but smoothly, like a river finding its path. Clara noticed how different it felt to talk to them. They listened without interrupting. When they spoke, they chose their words carefully, not to impress, but to be understood. She felt seen in a way that surprised her. Daniel joked about how cafes had become his second home since his divorce. He said it lightly, but the weight of it was there. Michael spoke about how teaching kept him grounded after a difficult loss, though he didn't go into detail. Clara didn't push. She didn't need to. Time passed without any of them checking. The clock, the cafe began to thin out as the rain slowed outside. Light from the windows softened, reflecting off the wet street. Clara felt a strange sense of calm, mixed with something deeper. Something she didn't want to name yet. She wasn't flirting. They weren't either. But there was a quiet pull between them, not based on age or attraction, but on shared loneliness and curiosity. It felt honest. Clara shared that she had been questioning her choices lately. She talked about how people her age seemed to rush into life plans without stopping to ask if they were happy. Daniel nodded, understanding too well. Michael added that time teaches you what matters, but it never teaches you early enough. There. Words stayed with her. As the afternoon moved on, Clara realized she had stayed far longer than she planned. A part of her wanted to leave before the moment ended naturally, before it turned into something awkward or forced. She picked up her coat and stood. "I should go," she said, smiling. "I didn't mean to take over your table." "You didn't?" Michael said quickly. "It was nice." Daniel agreed, his eyes thoughtful. "You brought good energy with you." Clara hesitated, then spoke again, her voice softer now. "I want to say something. I hope it doesn't sound strange." She said, "I didn't come here today by accident. And I don't think you did either." Both men looked at her, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. Clara met their eyes, one after the other. She wasn't sure why she felt this way, only that it was true. There was a sense that this meeting mattered, even if none of them yet understood how. The air between them felt heavier now, charged with meaning. Michael leaned back slightly, studying her face. Daniel folded his hands on the table, waiting. Clara smiled, a small, uncertain smile, and stepped back from the table. "I hope we meet again," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the door, the bell above it ringing softly as she left. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Inside the cafe, Daniel and Michael sat in silence, both staring at the empty chair she had just left behind. Feeling the same unexpected thought rise in their minds, that afternoon was not over yet, and whatever had just begun was far from simple. The bell above the cafe door had barely stopped ringing when silence settled over the table. Daniel and Michael sat still, the empty chair between them feeling louder than the room itself. For a moment neither spoke. Nay, both felt ether. Strange shift in the air, as if something important had passed through and left a mark. Michael was the first to break the silence. "She wasn't ordinary," he said quietly. Daniel nodded, "No." "And she wasn't careless either. They didn't rush to follow her. Something told them not to. Instead, they sat, finishing their coffee slowly, each lost in thought. Outside, the clouds were breaking, thin lines of light pushing through. Daniel finally stood and placed a few bills on the table. "Walk?" he asked. Michael agreed. They stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool air clearing their heads. They walked without a plan, letting the city guide them. A block later, near the corner bookstore, they saw Clara again. She stood under the awning, checking her phone as if deciding where to go next. Daniel stopped. Michael smiled slightly. "Looks like fate isn't done." They approached, careful not to startle her. Clara looked up and laughed softly when she saw them. "I was hoping that would happen," she said. They walked together, side by side, not touching, yet aware of one another. Clara spoke first, as if continuing a thought already shared. "I left too quickly," she said. "Sometimes I do that when something feels important." Daniel understood that feeling too. Well, they found a small park nearby, wet benches shining under the pale sky. They sat, leaving space but not distance. Clara took a breath, her eyes on the ground. "My father used to bring me places like that cafe," she said. He believed conversations could change lives. Michael's expression softened. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," Clara said. "I lost him last year. Since then, I've felt unsteady, like I'm moving but not forward." Daniel listened closely. He felt the weight of her words. She looked up at them. "When I saw you two, I didn't see strangers. I saw people who've lived through things and kept going. I think I needed that today. Michael felt something open inside him. He had spent years being careful, guarded. Yet here he was, listening to a young woman speak with honesty. And it felt natural. Daniel spoke next. She reminded me of who I was before life got complicated, he said. Before I stopped trusting my instincts, Clara smiled. But there was sadness in it. I'm scared of making the wrong choices, she admitted. Everyone says time is on your side when you're young, but it doesn't feel that way. Michael nodded. Time doesn't protect you. But it does teach you, sometimes painfully. They talked openly now, the words coming faster. Daniel shared how his marriage ended, not in anger, but in silence, and how that silence still followed. Michael spoke of love lost, of learning how to wake up each day without someone who once knew every part of him. Clara listened, her eyes shining, not from tears, but understanding. You're both stronger than you think, she said. Still here, you're still open. Those words stayed with them. The sky cleared further, sunlight touching the tops of buildings. The city felt alive again. Daniel checked his watch but didn't feel rushed. I don't know what this is, Clara said, standing slowly. I just know it matters. Michael stood too. Not everything needs a label, Daniel agreed. Some moments are just meant to wake us up. They exchanged numbers, not with promises but with respect. No pressure. No expectations. Clara stepped back, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Thank you, she said, for listening. She walked away confident this time, blending into the crowd. Daniel and Michael watched her go, both feeling lighter and heavier at once. They didn't speak until she was gone. She didn't pick us, Michael said thoughtfully. She reminded us. Daniel smiled. That we still have something to give. They turned and walked in opposite directions, each carrying the same quiet truth. That afternoon had changed nothing on the surface, yet everything underneath. Some meetings aren't about romance or age or surprise. They are about timing. This one had arrived exactly when it was needed.